Oh, what could it be? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's placenta. Oh, yeah. Welcome, everyone, to Unbelievable, the podcast where I tell my good friend two unbelievable stories from history, one real, one fake.
And I have to guess which one's which.
That's right. I am spoiled milk's worst enemy, joined here by Appalachian placenta tree forest, Kurt Danner.
What? That caught me off guard so much.
You heard me.
No, I heard you. I just didn't understand you.
Okay, it's Appalachia. You know this.
No,
You're
all the words
familiar.
individually I'm good with. It's just strung together. Wow, that's a brand new concept.
I guess we will figure this out as we go along this episode. But before we get started, we want to do a quick shameless plug. We are now on TikTok and Instagram. We're sharing reels, baby. Kurt is getting his editing hands on. So if you want to get bite-sized episodes, a little fun for your whatever you're doing. I was going to say your commute, but we don't care. You can be unemployed. Most people that listen to this are unemployed anyway.
You're really selling it.
But yeah, find us on TikTok. We're on there. We somehow survived the TikTok ban, and we are trying to take full advantage of the fact that it's still available in the United States.
Yeah, we're recording this the day after the alleged United States TikTok ban, which, you know, Luis, I was really thinking us creating a TikTok like 1 week before it's supposed to be banned in the United States. It's a real like Timothy Dexter move, you know. We're really buying continental currency right as it's about to be worthless. And then the crazy part is that it's not banned. So I feel like following this Timothy Dexter logic, we're guaranteed to have a wildly successful TikTok account. So I'm very excited for that. But yeah, if anyone wants to see some short clips from our episodes with some animations, absolutely go check that out.
Kurt, what is our TikTok handle?
Unbelievable Pod. Nice and straight to the point.
Yeah. Very big surprise from our other account on Instagram, Unbelievable Pod. We're staying consistent.
We saved the creativity for the recordings, okay?
That's true. And please watch them because Kurt's hands are blistered from all the editing he's done with those.
I've been doing long hours in the editing mines.
Yeah, that's right. In any case, I think with that, we are ready to begin the episode. So, Kurt, I will be telling you two stories of fun and mystery today. But before we get right into them, please, do you have a fun, fast fact for me?
I do, absolutely. And, you know, this is, I think, a very topical fast fact because, Luis, as you well know, our score currently is 9 points for you and 6 points for me. So this potentially could be our last episode of the season. So this fast fact, it's about the beginning and end of a conflict. And not just any conflict, but the American Civil War, which famously had friends and family members fighting against each other on opposite sides. So it's very, very fitting for this episode. Now, obviously, the Civil War had, you know, a moment where historians agree that this is the point where it started, and then another point where it ended. Now, tell me, Luis, true or false? There was this same random guy at both of these points, both the beginning and the end, despite having no connection to the war. There was just this random guy who happened to be there at both the beginning and the end of the American Civil War.
I'm going to say true, because I've heard the story of a guy who was a farmer who actually tried to move several times, and the war seemed to follow him. And I think it ended at the point where at Appomattox Courthouse, where the treaty to end the American Civil War was actually in his land, and that was like the final nail in the coffin where he said, "Oh, come on." Never been able to run away.
Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail right on the head there. Fortunately, I have a few more fun details to add to this. So this guy you're talking about, his name was Wilmer McLean, which just, first of all, that's great.
Fantastic name.
He owned a farm in Manassas, Virginia in July 1861. And at that point in time, Confederate General Beauregard came to McLean's farm and commandeered McLean's house to use as headquarters for potential fighting that might break out. McLean sold sugar from his farm to the Confederates, so he probably did not particularly mind them using his house as headquarters. But shortly after this, the Battle of Bull Run happened, basically right on Wilmer's farm. And this was what was considered the first battle of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And Wilmer's house was actually so close to the fighting that at one point a cannonball fell down the kitchen chimney into the fireplace and destroyed their dinner. Now,
No.
about a year later, Wilmer and his family moved 120 miles south to try to escape the war to a town, as you said, called Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, which what a weird name, Appomattox Courthouse. Sorry, I don't want to get hung up on this, but that's such a weird name. And then also, you remember that detail, like, out of everything?
Listen, I went to the Civil War Museum in Springfield, Illinois. I know what's up. Thank you, 8th grade field trip. You taught me well.
So anyway, Wilmer moves to Appomattox Courthouse, and then 2 years after this, a messenger sent by Confederate General Robert E. Lee knocked on McLean's front door and asked if Robert E. Lee could use his house for a meeting, and this meeting turned out to be General Robert E. Lee meeting Union General Ulysses S. Grant to surrender. Now, two funny things came out of this whole ordeal. Number one, Luis, was that allegedly Wilmer McLean would jokingly say, quote, "The war started in my kitchen and ended in my parlor," which is just a great line. I don't know if that
Incredible.
is absolutely true. Apparently there's like a little bit of question about it, but you know what? I'm believing it. I'm buying into it.
It's unbelievable.
And then secondly is that, so there's this little like after note here that after this surrender happens, after it's finalized, literally the moment it's finalized, Union soldiers began taking literally every single piece of furniture in the room because they know that it'll now have historic value, and basically just handing whatever
come
amount of
on.
money they think is appropriate to Wilmer. Wilmer's not trying to sell any of this stuff. They're just like taking it and being like, here's $40, which I think would amount to like a few $100s now. So not only
that
did Wilmer's
sucks.
house get commandeered
No.
twice, but they stole all the furniture in his parlor, which, you know, I feel bad for Wilmer, but also that is quite funny.
I mean, it's at the end, it's a happy story since he survived the bloodiest war in the U.S. history. But God, poor guy, all he wanted was to get away from the war.
That's true. All things considered, he was only minorly inconvenienced by the war.
Still, would suck to be him. I would feel his pain, honestly. And I'm currently in the process of moving, so I can just imagine I move to a new place, and as soon as I get there, they're like, "Oh, hey, that futon looks mighty fine." Historic value, I'd
That
say.
futon looks very historically valuable, and I'll be taking it for a few $100s. So anyway, Luis, with that spirit of a brutal conflict between brothers beginning and ending, and absolute shenaniganry of stealing someone's furniture on the spot because of its historical value, let's get into these stories. What do you have for me today?
Well, Kurt, I really don't have much historical value for today's stories. Well, I mean, we could argue that none of our stories have any historical value, but that's beside the point.
They might not even have any value, frankly.
Honestly. But I want to make sure I focus today on something that goes beyond objective truth, and that is superstitions, Kurt.
Ooh, okay. Interesting.
We are talking about superstitions, things that make you believe in luck, maybe old wives' tales, if you want to call it that way. But it's those little things that we've believed across our lives. Why are they so? And do they have any backing with history? That's what we'll be finding out today. And with that context, Kurt, we'll be starting off our very first story with placentas. Kurt, are you familiar with the concept of the placenta?
Yes, I am. I'm so nervous for where this is going.
All right, everyone. For those of you that do not know what the placenta is, when a child is born, it's of course inside its mother's womb, but it's covered in a sac. Right, it's covered in a sac that keeps all of the amniotic fluid
like
in.
a Kinder egg.
Not just that, like a Kinder egg, but this Kinder egg helps provide the baby with oxygen. It also helps provide the baby with nutrients that are needed for the development of a child, basically. You know, you've probably seen this in your sex ed classes, and if you didn't, I am so sorry that this is the first time you're hearing it from just a stupid Mexican boy. But anyway, in any case, when a child is born, typically what follows? Umbilical cord.
True.
Duh. Easy.
Very true.
But after, there's a chance that just the placenta comes out. Most of the time, placenta just comes right out alongside with a child. And considering that when a child is born, I mean, you have a new life coming out of another person, right? So when you have this other foreign object coming out of your body, in a way, you're giving birth to it, right?
Right.
And with that in mind, this has given the placenta importance across the world and cultural importance across the world. For example, some indigenous communities across the world have practices to safeguard and ritualize the placenta, right?
They ritualize it? Like
for example,
what are they drawing a pentagram around it, or what's going on here?
Well, I mean, for example, some communities gather around and they eat the placenta, not just mothers, but like they cut up the placenta and eat it because some communities believe that this may grant those who eat it valor and strength of the future child and whatever, right?
What if the future child is a loser? They're really placing, a lot of bets on this child.
Yeah, they're playing a baccarat table of whether or not the placenta is going to be beneficial for your life. But hey, ain't life just a roulette wheel? Oh, big casino on today. What's going on?
The placenta giveth and the placenta taketh away.
Exactly. And in other places, like for example, New Zealand, New Guinea, some remote parts of the Pacific Islands, there's this belief that burying a placenta can bring you fortune and can presage how your life is going to turn out or how the life of the child is going to turn out. And this is dependent on where and how you bury the placenta. What do I mean by this? Some places bury the placenta with with pencils and pieces of paper to ensure that this child gets good grades in school. Some other places say that if you have a girl, you have to bury this placenta on the left side of your house, or if you have a boy, you have to bury in the right side of your house in order to have them be lucky. Things like this, okay? Sometimes they even bury the placenta with some money.
It's very specified.
Yeah, they bury the placenta with some money, again, back in Indonesia, to ensure that the child is going to have money in its future life. So there's all these different rituals. Like, for example, there's also the fact that sometimes it is burned and ashes are spread around the house to prevent death in childhood, right? So to avoid that the child dies, they kind of cast a magic ring made of placenta ash, which that's an incredible name for like a Midwest emo band, you know? Next on stage, we've got placenta ash. Anyway, we move on. And not just that, Kurt, but in some places, like, for example, a lot of these take place in Indonesia. Just keep that in mind. In some places, for example, in the city of...
Indonesia's just rolling out hit after hit.
They're rolling out placenta after placenta. But in the town of Bayung Gede, I don't know if that's how you say it, they grab the placentas, they seal them inside coconut shells, and they hang them from trees. And in this forest, in this town, it's so common that there's just coconut shells with placentas inside hanging all across this forest and this graveyard, to the point where in 2020, the Indonesian government made it a national landmark, a protected landmark. So again, placenta, very important in Indonesia.
For what purpose? Why are they hanging them in coconuts?
Well, it's because, again, since it's something that's being born.
Just good vibes.
Well, since it's something that's quote unquote being born alongside a baby, it's also considered to be like the spirit sibling for the baby. So they want to make sure that it's there and just around, I guess.
They're just preserving it for the sake of the placenta. I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're what are we eating tonight, kids? Oh, pickled placenta. Just for you guys. Bring some life to your deli lunches.
That's nice. I didn't know there were so many quote unquote uses for placenta. I mean, I don't know if you can call it a use if it doesn't do anything, but I guess I haven't done the testing on this. I don't know if I can definitively refute this placenta and coconut business. Maybe this is the way to go.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Kurt, because you're right. In the West, placentas are typically considered medical waste. Right? Most of the places we've been talking about have been in Africa, have been in Indonesia. They've been in places away from the culture we live in today here in the European-influenced West. Okay? And again, it's been considered nothing more than medical waste, except if you ask certain moms and mom groups on Facebook, A lot of them, surprisingly, do advise eating the placenta. Like just your average mom.
You do really good research for this podcast, Luis.
Hey, man, listen, if you tell me about mom groups in Castle Rock, Colorado, I might just have to do a deep dive. I just didn't expect that I was going to come across placenta. It really does surprise you. In any case, there are some groups and like more new age, whatever, people that say, yeah, the placenta does have benefits. The placenta, you should eat it and it helps the mother, blah, blah, blah. But again, generally, they're just thrown out. There's never any real practical use. Like, you're not going to preserve it and give it to your child as like something to keep safe for the rest of their lives. Like, no, of course not.
Right. Unless you want them to have good luck.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this because the people in Appalachia, however you want to say it, do have a belief still to this day rooted in placenta, or a placenta belief, a placenta thought.
Whoa.
And
placenta fact.
A placenta fact coming straight to you from West Virginia. Why do I say this? Because in parts of Appalachia, which for those of you who do not know, there's a mountain range in like eastern United States. I'm talking about West Virginia, and the states to the south of that, which I do not recall. Even I think at some point, some people can consider, I think, Ohio part of the Appalachian Mountain Range.
Oh.
That some people,
I'm not gonna
Ohioans,
that one, but that seems like a hot take.
It does seem like a hot take. And this place is often considered to be how do I say this? A place left behind by the rest of the U.S. There are still a lot of very traditional rural communities in Appalachia that maintain a lot of customs and traditions that go back to very early colonial times in the United States.
Yeah. Just to pause for a second, but there's actually like kind of some twofold nuance to what you're saying there. Cause I think that in a lot of these places, people would say that like they've been kind of left behind by society. Some of these places, the infrastructure is failing a little bit. And so there's like areas that don't get maybe the attention that they deserve. But also at the same time, a lot of these areas have been like very, very isolated as far as their culture from the beginning or the creation of the United States has been very isolated. So some of it is still like very close to what the original culture or traditions are.
That's true. There's even a couple of locations, and this is not part of the story, but I know that there are some places and some dialects up in West Virginia that some say it's the closest approximation to what the people in the Mayflower would have spoken.
Right.
Which is kind of neat.
It's interesting, yeah.
But in any case, that's beside the point, because in northern...
We're here to talk about placentas.
Let's not forget the fact of why we're here, and that is, of course, placenta. Because in northern West Virginia, the belief still remains that if you bury your placenta soon after the birth of your child, this will bring you great fortune. And I'm not talking fortune about luck, right? I'm not talking that you're going to have prosperous life. I mean wealth. If you bury your placenta, you will have money.
Oh.
Okay?
Like a tooth fairy type of situation.
Exactly. But here's the thing, Kurt. After doing a little bit of digging on placenta, as you do on
we found a lot of placenta.
Yeah, as you do on a Thursday evening. I'm here looking up placenta, and I noticed that this story is based on truth, based on a real historical fact, Kurt. And that's going to take us...
What?
That's going to take us, Kurt, to colonial times, United States, right before the Revolutionary War.
Oh, this is very exciting.
Okay, so the year is 1755, and the place is Wiley, Virginia. Current day, it's Wiley, West Virginia, but back in the day, as you may know, Virginia and West Virginia were just a single Virginia.
Right.
Now, Wiley, Virginia is not too far from the current border with Ohio.
Famed Appalachian state.
Yeah. West Virginia to this day, its western border is basically marked or demarcated by the Ohio River. And most of the cities or bigger settlements in West Virginia that are not hills, mountains, or just forests They're mostly in the Ohio River Valley because it's a generally very fertile place and a place where settlements started coming up. And this is where our boy, our main character for today's story, comes in. Kurt, his name is Dewey Miller. Okay? Though he does have a nickname that is Doldrum. So Dewey Doldrum Miller, which stellar, honestly. So Doldrum Miller. I'm going to call her Dewey or Doldrum. Anyway, he lives in Wiley, Virginia, and he does what most people in Virginia do in 1755, which is have a farm. What kind of farm? Mostly wheat and tobacco, because
classic
Virginia became, I mean, we know today that Virginia tobacco is like it's a name, right? It stems all the way from colonial times. Tobacco can be grown alongside wheat, so a lot of fields in West Virginia were both wheat and tobacco. Now, he had the privilege of having the biggest farm in Wiley, Virginia. I mean, then again, after all, there's like 35 families, so it's not a huge place, but he has the biggest farm, so go him. And if you are familiar with your history, Kurt, in 1754, so 1 year before this story begins, the French and Indian War broke out in the U.S. colonies. Now, French and Indian War, for those of you who may know, was a war that was fought between England and between France. Why is it called French and Indian War? Well, this was a bit of a proxy war fought by the two main colonies of England and France, and that was the United States and the French colonies of what would eventually become Canada. And since most of the people helping out the Canadian side or the British side were local Iroquois natives and other natives of the area, that's why it's become known as the French and Indian War. Got it?
Yep.
Okay, well, with this war, the colony that would then become the United States started looking toward farms because, as we know, wars are some of the main drivers of industry, and farms were in greater need than usual and just to feed their population. And in a war, what are some of the most important things you can have? Bread and cigarettes, obviously. So the English crown went to the Commonwealth of Virginia and said, hey guys, give us your tobacco and your wheat. And so they exploited a bunch of the different farms. And by exploiting, I mean they just went in and gathered most of the wheat and tobacco for the war was made in Virginia. Naturally, Wiley.
They didn't even offer a market price or anything. They conscripted the wheat and tobacco.
No. I mean they were purchasing tobacco and wheat from this farm these farms. But they were going specifically to Virginia. Not just that, but because just north of Virginia is where you start having the French presence of what would be French Canada. So, Virginia was a great place to have wheat and tobacco ready for the front lines. At first, Wiley, of course, became prosperous and farms of the region became prosperous. But the problem is, this war lasted a long time, Kurt. I'm talking from 1754 to 1763. That is nearly 10 years of war.
That's quite a while.
And
Wiley didn't have the proper vision, They could have been the hottest wheat and tobacco destination.
Well, they really were, but there was one problem. The first few years of the war were some of the most intense fighting took place. So there came a point where these small farms could not hit the demand that was necessitated of them by the English crown.
People needed a lot of cigarettes.
People need so many cigarettes and so much bread. Understandable. I mean, we've all been there. Listen, had we lived in West Virginia during our times in university, Kurt, I know that I would have gone down a dark path. Darker than the one I already did go down. But
deep into the bread and cigarettes.
Bread and cigarettes. Forget bread and circus. There was eventually a land dispute that came up with Dewey Doldrum Miller. That came up with him and the crown, and especially since there was an increased royal presence or increased English presence in Virginia or near his town, more bureaucracy was coming to the area, so people were starting to divvy up farms. So he went to go resolve a land dispute that had come to him in 1755 to the town of St. Mary's, which is a town next to the Ohio River. There, he met a French explorer. This is important and one of the life-changing moments for Dewey because he told him about the placenta-related traditions of some of the Iroquois natives of what is now considered Canada.
He gave him the forbidden placenta knowledge.
He gave them forbidden placenta knowledge, which what the Iroquois people would do is bury placenta. Bury placenta for the safe being of the child and in order to give the child a connection with Mother Earth. And Dewey was surprised by this because he was about to have a child. He was very near to have a child. But, you know, he saw this and was like, hey, maybe what if I bury some placenta? Like, I don't think anything's going to happen. It's just going to be something fun, right? It's not
There's no downside. It's not like he had other plans for the placenta. I assume,
he's like,
you know,
he's not seeing it as productive. So he buried the placenta out in his tobacco fields, and you know, he said, "Okay, I'm gonna bury it in the
field. Ooh.
I want to bury it in the tobacco fields because I want my child to be helping in the field like his proud father and help me with all this demand for tobacco and wheat, you know, stuff like that."
That's gonna be a tangy tobacco harvest. I'll tell you what.
That's right. Hey, do you want placenta flavored cigs? It's up to you.
As a spicy boy.
What vape flavors do you have? I'm thinking placenta or cherry.
Stem cells built in to the cigarettes.
Little stem cell flavor?
That's
nice.
This man's living in 3054.
He really is. But here's the thing. He buries the placenta not expecting much. However, 2 months later, he's finding that the tobacco plants that were nearby the spot where he planted the placenta were growing to be around 6 feet tall.
No, Luis, are you gonna start telling me that there's a giant beanstalk sprouting here? This story is insane.
No, Kurt, don't worry. It gets kind of crazier. Hear me out. So I don't know how much you know about tobacco plants, Kurt, but they typically tend to grow at around 4 feet tall, maybe 5 foot tall if they're really big. Or that's at least how they used to be back in the day. These days, there's huge tobacco plants, but like more traditional tobacco plants, most of the ones that are not.
Because we discovered the placenta knowledge.
Well,
tobacco field,
well, that's the thing.
Placenta.
Yeah, well, these were growing to be about about 6 feet tall, Kurt. And he actually wrote about this. We have in his own words, and I quote, "The stalk rising 6 foot away from soil adjacent tobacco leaves would stun traveler from Virginia, meaning Virginia, to the Georgias, meaning Georgia," unquote. So he wrote that he noticed that these specific ones were growing. And, he said, okay, what's going on? You know, this can only mean one thing, of course, placenta. He was convinced that it was the placenta. And luckily for him, he had a sister that lived in the town in Wiley, Virginia. And shortly after this happened, his sister had a baby. And he kindly asked, "May I see that placenta, dear sister?" And he gets the placenta, goes back to the field.
He approached her in a trench coat and said, "Are you interested in selling that placenta?"
Hey, you gonna do anything with that? You gonna eat that?
You gonna finish that?
Gonna finish that? Can I have it? And so that's what he did. He took his sister's placenta and he went and planted it in the fields. And he noticed once again the pattern of these tobacco plants growing taller than the rest of his crop. This is starting to get kind of fishy. And Kurt, listen. I want to make a quick side note here and say I have only been close to a child, a newborn child, or people that are having newborn children probably like 3 times in my life, right? I've not had a lot of proximity to new babies. Maybe that's just the way I've lived my life, or maybe we just don't have that much connection to children, to newborn children. Like, what do you think? What about you?
You and newborn children do not have a lot in common. That's true.
No. Except that we're both hairless.
But yeah, I guess I also have not had a lot of contact with like you mean like fresh, like when they're still sticky, like that recently we're talking about?
Well, not that recent, but like the day of or like the day after.
Yeah, no, I don't think this has happened very many times in my life.
Not to me either. Like maybe in my circle I just don't have a lot of people having children.
Are you going to tell me that I've just been missing the part after every birth where the placenta buyer comes in? and buys a placenta so we
Well,
can grow
Kurt,
better tobacco.
Here's the thing. Doldrum Miller had a close contact in the nearby town of Adlai, Adlai, who was a midwife.
Oh no.
Okay.
Not the placenta plug.
A midwife, for those of you who don't know, is someone that would help a person rearing a child, right? So back when, if you're not dealing with a doctor, you're probably dealing with someone that's going to help you procure your baby out of you, right? And like you said, this was the placenta plug for this man. This was the placenta plug for this man, and he started requesting to this person in Adlai to get him placentas. And I wrote here in my notes, Kurt, I think a phrase that I don't know if it's ever been written before. He procured placentas for relatively cheap. So there we go. You ever procure placentas for relatively cheap?
Below market price placentas.
Don't know. Yeah. And well, what did he do? He started naturally cutting them up and planting them across his fields.
Wow.
Very exciting.
Wow.
And well, he continued to do this for the rest of the French and Indian War, and his crops, according to him, were incredibly successful. So much so that he continued doing this until the end of the Revolutionary War, Kurt. He did this for 20 years of placenta plowing. Well, that doesn't sound right. Of plowing with placenta.
Well, I mean, if it's successful, why would you stop? Like, if you're farming stuff and you can get massively bigger crops, that's the name of the game, right? So honestly, I'm more surprised by like what happened that made him stop at the Revolutionary War. People began to frown upon this placenta connection. I do have to say, if you get to a point in your life where your business involves having a placenta connection, I feel like you do have to like step back and take stock of like,
probably
what I have going on.
In a 20-year period, realistically, how much placenta can you procure? That's what I'm thinking.
No one man should have all that placenta.
God, it's too much power.
Frankly.
Too much power. Went mad with power. What, did he have money? No, placenta. In any case, Kurt, at the end of the war, 1781, this man had become, quite frankly, pretty rich. I mean, he was able to sell most of his tobacco to the war effort, and his wheat, of course. So he decided, I'm going to sell my farm and move to Charleston, the city of Charleston, which, funny enough, and I did not know this until earlier today, Charleston is the capital of West Virginia, but he moved to Charleston. At this point, just one of the bigger cities in Virginia, because, again, West Virginia did not exist at this point. And he decided to try his luck as a printer. So working as the person who prints the books, right? The guy that's like bringing the press down and making the printing shop.
I see.
And it's because of this, Kurt, that we have this story. Because he decided to write his exploits and his life down, and published his own autobiography named Pleasants County Wheat and Tobacco Almanac, Considering Wiley Ranch Amniotic Potash, West Virginia Trading, 1782, which...
Wow, good name. I like that he's like, this is a book about him, but like right in the front, he's like, I'm tobacco growing. Like that's one of the most important points here.
Well, it needed to appease the people of...
Hey, I'm not saying he's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it was a bit of like a guidebook of what to do. Like current day farmers' almanacs do this as well. But he decided to include his story. And because of this spread around Western Virginia, what is now West Virginia. And farmers started sometimes doing it. But again, I don't know if everyone had close access to a midwife, to the point where you could just be getting placentas.
So do we know if he had like a sense of like that it was a little bit weird what he was doing? I mean, I don't even know if it would be frowned upon at the time, but is this kind of like he's publishing a book where he's like, hey, I've found this hack, local farmer knows this one simple trick. Midwives hate him or whatever. or is it like, something that's kind of adjacent to like med students in ancient times, grave robbing to get bodies to study anatomy, where he's like, this is the tell-all of like how I've been successful?
I think this
Or do we know?
this was mostly a case of he wanted to show different ways of how stuff grew and how farmers wanted to help each other out to get bigger crops and better crops. You know, in a way, it kind of is learned experience, and in a way, it's also like, ooh, this is what happened to me. Maybe it can help you. So maybe, you know, like a bit of a grift in a way.
Oh, I see. He's like, I made it and you can too.
Basically.
Just get a placenta.
Just
connection.
get a placenta. But like I said, not many people had both big farms and also placenta connections. So while this information kind of started spreading around Virginia and the places where this printout made it to, it didn't really catch on as much as other things, but it still remained in the lexicon of the West Virginian people, to the point where if you can see that it's still a tradition where people say you need to plant your placenta for good fortune. And now it's being translated for good luck, but it's also considered for money, and it all goes back to this. Now, we need to take this with a grain of salt, though, because he does get kind of strange in the almanac, saying that when you like in the 5th year of planting placentas, like his cows started like having triplets. Like he fed cows placentas and they started having triplets, which that's where it starts kind of getting ridiculous, right? But, you know, years later, and by years later, I mean 2018, 2018, this story made it to the University of West Virginia, and some scientists decided to test out, well, what happened. And turns out that those researchers in the University of West Virginia find that the nutrients that the placenta is able to provide a baby, once they decay organically, they still hold a lot of those same nutrients that can potentially feed the ground and work as good compost. They also hold some oxygen, some remaining oxygen, still for about 2 days after it's removed from the body.
Oh, interesting.
So if you plant it soon enough, it's also a good source of oxygen. And of course, as it's decomposing, it's a good source of nitrogen, which is what plants need to grow well. So it really acts as an incredibly great fertilizer, which, hey.
We're actually doing the stem cell infused tobacco. I can't believe it.
But that's the thing. These days, probably most farms are heavily regulated, so it's probably going to be bad to plant placenta in the ground. And especially since it's not something you can upscale, I think, it hasn't really caught on, but it's continued as a bit of a folktale, as an old wives' tale, Kurt.
So did the results show that, like, it was kind of like a coincidence because, like, placenta has a lot of minerals and, like, beneficial things that you could achieve otherwise if you did, like, modern composting or fertilizing or whatever? Or was it, like, placenta actually does have some sort of above average quality to promote plant growth, but it's just not really a viable option, so that's why it's kind of like remained like a niche thing.
What they did find is that it does have benefits, like composting and fertilizing benefits. However, with the fertilizers we use these days, they can match or even top the benefits that would be brought by placenta. Because consider back in 1750s, 1760s, what was the main fertilizer and compost of colonial farms? It was manure, right? It was manure and feces of animals. And in some places, even ash or bone. But now, these days, we have technology to inject nitrogen into the ground and to really get more of these vitamins. They even, in this 2018 paper, they said that coffee beans actually help out more than placenta ever could. So grind up coffee beans work better as fertilizer.
That's the power of caffeine.
Yeah, and so instead of playing rock, paper, scissors, we're going to play manure, placenta, coffee beans. And, well, we know coffee beans beats placenta every time.
Well, that's I just like how you kind of contextualize it within these superstitions that they seem a little bit weird now, but we have to remember that like there's a lot that we don't understand as well, and maybe like people created these ancient traditions because they were a little bit onto something, but they couldn't really completely understand it, and they kind of got sidetracked with doing something that was just a weird tradition instead of actually scientific. But I don't know. I guess it's interesting to me, historically, because I guess it kind of shows how there's more human history to go. That like you look back and see these people were doing something that was like almost correct, but they didn't really understand it, and it's something that we still don't understand. So I wonder what the future will bring.
God, I hope it brings placenta.
It's bound to. I mean, look, at this point we've got stem cells in modern times. People are obsessed with stem cells, and back in time, apparently we were growing placenta tobacco. So that seems like it's got to be the through line, Wait till we find out that Dyson spheres are powered by placenta.
Oh my God. We're going to make it to the stars, and all thanks to placenta. God, the future is bright. The future is bright ahead, pal. My God.
The Matrix runs on placenta.
Alrighty, Kurt. Well, that was the first story, and we're going to move right along to our second story. And like I promised you, Kurt, this is also a superstition, old wives' tale based story. So, how are we going to begin today? Kurt, are you familiar with the concept of refrigeration?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Man, I'm so intrigued now because, like, where do we go from placenta superstition? And I was just trying to like think in my head, what are you gonna say? What superstition? And now for refrigeration.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want everybody listening to feel the tension with me because I'm like, you could say anything right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right. Are you familiar with milk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Milk.
Now, do you know what you get when you get refrigeration and milk together?
Wow, where are we going? I mean, it preserves the milk, obviously.
Yeah, that's actually it,
Okay,
Kurt. That's it. It does make milk last longer.
It keeps the milk good.
It keeps the milk good. So that's a problem, Kurt. What are you going to do if you don't have...
That's a problem.
What are you going to... Well, that's the root of the issue that we're going to face today. And that is what happens if you don't have access to refrigeration, but you have just a lot of milk in your hands.
You got to drink that tangy milk, boy. For the last story, we had tangy cigarettes. Now we're on the tangy milk.
It's placenta-infused milk.
Oh, it's so spicy.
Here's the thing, Kurt. It's true. If you don't have refrigeration, milk will go bad, especially before pasteurization. Fresh milk goes bad really easily. So what can you do with it? Well, you can make other dairy products, right? You can boil it or boil it and get like the cream.
Oh, I have an idea. Cheese time.
Yes, Kurt. You can make.
Please, Luis, tell me, is it cheese time?
It is cheese time. You can make it into cheese, but the story's protagonist is not cheese, I'm afraid. But yeah, you can make it into cheese, you can churn it into butter. There's ways to store it. However, sometimes you just have too much milk and you don't just want to make a lot of cheese. I mean, you want to drink milk too. We like milk generally.
That's true.
And you get to parts of the world like Finland and Russia where it's really cold for half of the year or for even the majority of the year. So they've got it made easy here. They don't have refrigeration, but they do have cold, the power of cold.
Right.
And so milk wouldn't go too bad. However,
nature is the refrigeration.
However, in parts of Russia that are further south or even closer to Finland, especially in the summer, summers get really hot. So once again, you run into this problem. What the hell are you going to do with all this milk, Kurt?
Cheese. Come on.
Well, that's the thing that you could do. Like back in Roman times, you did have people that would go up to the mountains and get ice and then stick it in the ground to make like early refrigerators, or even in like early 1900s, late 1800s, you would have these containers called ice boxes, which were they were just boxes to contain ice and keep everything that was inside relatively fresh. The problem, Kurt, ice boxes were never huge in Finland or Russia, and they were not big. So, and especially in small, isolated rural villages, you're never gonna get ice boxes. They were not big there. So in Russia, especially in Russia, you have a lot of potentially spoiled milk. And if you're a milk seller, well, that's probably less money for you. But if you're a milk drinker, that's probably going to lead to a lot of disease and severe illness. So what happened? After years and years of testing out what to do, Russians started dipping something into the milk to keep it fresh, Kurt. Do you know what it was?
Oh, wow. I have no idea.
And no, Kurt,
Bread?
it's not placenta. No, Kurt.
It's not placenta.
The Russian people resorted...
Stem cell tobacco.
Stem cell tobacco. No, Kurt. Russian people decided to throw frogs into the milk and noticed that when frogs were in the milk, when frogs were just in there and different amphibians were in the milk would not go bad. So, for generations, Kurt, if you were a milkman, you also had an army of frogs that you would stick in your big crates of milk, particularly in the summertime, to keep them from spoiling.
Oh, wow. I mean, okay, hang on. I just got to enjoy this for a moment because last story, we had to have a placenta plug.
Mm-hmm.
And now this story, you're telling me that if you're a milkman in Russia in this time, because I assume the milkman works every day, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't have time to go catch frogs. He's got to have a frog connection. The frog plug.
The frog plug, yeah.
One of these is going to be accurate. So either there was the placenta plug or the frog plug. That's just so wonderful.
But here's the thing, Kurt. It's really interesting because for years, generations even, no one knew why this worked. So families in rural Russia and rural Finland would put frogs in their milk, and they would just continue doing so for years after years after years. And no one, Kurt, decided to check on these poor Russians putting frogs in their milk. No one really understood.
Should I take a guess, or is it just beyond me?
No, take a guess. Yeah, what do you think, Kurt? So why would you put frogs in your milk, and why would that stop it from spoiling?
Well, halfway I'm thinking maybe because the way the frog swims is gonna churn the milk in some way, where it makes it slightly into American-ish cheese, so it doesn't spoil. But also I'm thinking, frogs, they're very slimy. Maybe there's some chemical they have in the slime that keeps them hydrated, and so it keeps the milk from drying out or bacteria from growing somehow. I don't know. I feel like I'm buying into the slime. Historically, I feel like it's more likely. It just feels right that people were drinking a little slime.
You're actually on the right track, Kurt, and I'm very glad you went that route because, yeah, like I said, this is just
this big slime time.
Yeah, I think it's time for slime, Kurt.
Oh boy,
so
this is wonderful.
This was a tradition that was kept in Russia for a long time, and it was just taken as gospel. Okay, it's just okay. Yeah, those Russians put frogs in their milk. Whatever, big whoop. And it wasn't until 2010, Kurt, 2010, that scientists from the United Arab Emirates University discovered that the skin of some frogs would, as you said, release or ooze this kind of slime to cover their bodies in, right? That is how frogs keep fresh with slime on. And they found out that some of this ooze that would come out of their skin that they would secrete that contained chemicals that could fight bacteria and fungi. Okay, so
this is amazing.
So yes,
Louis, the theme of this episode is that the slimes are magical. Whichever one of these stories are true, the slimes are magical.
Slime
baby.
is magical.
Come on.
Yes, and not just that. So they started finding that there were chemicals in this body, specifically peptides, which is like proteins on the skin of frogs. And, well, this gave us a big new insight into the skin of frogs and the slime that came out of it. But yet, even though with this first revolutionary story in 2010, Kurt, no one really cared to do more research until 2012, when researchers at the Moscow State University, specifically Dr. Albert Lebedev, he started analyzing the chemicals that were on the skin of specifically the Russian brown frog. Funny enough, the frog that was thrown in milk. And they found around 70 different peptides, which are pieces of protein,
a lot of peptides.
amino acids, just a bunch of peptides. And they found that these peptides that were on the skin of the Russian brown frog had antibiotic qualities. And Dr. Lebedev explained in this 2012 paper that most of these secretions act as a first line of defense against bacteria and other microorganisms that thrive in the wet places frogs, toads, salamanders, and other amphibians live. Right? So frogs and other amphibians love hot spaces. And so these substances protect against hot and illnesses that would come alongside hot environments. Now, Curtis, what are some illnesses or bacteria that thrive in hot environments?
Well, I don't know about like particularly hot, but I was just thinking generally that like in bacteria needs kind of like a warmer environment to grow.
That's right.
Especially if you're thinking about like these amphibians that like frogs and salamanders, they're going to be like wet a lot or in wet environments, which is also a quality that bacteria needs. Probably even dark environments as well.
That's true.
So I don't know. It really might be kind of dealer's choice of like what kind of bacteria that this slime could be adapted to deal with.
Kurt, specifically, the peptides on the frog's skin had antibacterial qualities that treated specifically staphylococcus, aka like
of course,
staph infection, right? And also salmonella. Which, as we know, salmonella is the bacteria that you get in raw foods like raw chicken or even raw milk.
That's true. Everybody's mom warned them.
Yes, and these bacteria, exactly like you said, Kurt, thrive in warm, dark environments. What do you get when you get a barrel of fresh milk and cover it up in the summer? You get a dark, warm environment where salmonella and staphylococcus can thrive.
That's salmonella spring break, baby. You got to get the frog slime in there.
And that's the thing. Like, warmness itself is not what causes milk to go bad. It's these bacteria to make it spoil and be harmful to humans. So finally, in 2012, we got an answer as to potentially why we threw the Russian brown frog into milk for so many years. And now, of course, we have pasteurized milk and we have other processes that are to more regulate our milk that we consume in our everyday lives. But there are still some remote villages in both Finland and Russia that to this day choose the frog method. Just toss a frog in there. Keep it magical. Keep it ready. But interestingly, too, Kurt, it's these peptides were a great revelation for the scientific community, because we are finding naturally occurring repellents or naturally occurring antibiotics for some of the most harmful bacteria that our body produces. So there have been efforts, especially in this decade, back in 2012, back when this was found, to sell some of this research to Pfizer in order to have it, well, I guess, more available to synthesize antibiotics. But there haven't been any firm plans to do this and to bring a new frontier into frog glands, I guess, because not just
power of the slime,
power of the goo. It hasn't been able to just cure staphylococcus or salmonella, or at least protect from it, but also there is unfortunately, there's another peptide and another peptide link, or amino acids that are strung together make a peptide called bradykinin. And bradykinin is a peptide that's associated with the anaphylactic reaction, where your body starts closing up.
Right.
So there's a chance that if you synthesize something out of this, you might get a severe allergic reaction out of this. But again, we have actually found some other chemicals on frog skins that are currently used to treat other bacteria. For example, there is a chemical found in the mink frog of North America that can get rid of the so-called Iraqibacter, which is a drug-resistant bacteria that used to infect soldiers in Iraq.
Wow.
Right. So we've already, as a community, as a world, have come together to synthesize antibiotics from frogs. And yet we're still waiting to see how we can get salmonella and staph infection off of the Russian brown frog's back. Why do they have all the secrets? Are they being guarded by the state?
Wow.
We'll never know. But what we do know is that they were used specifically to make sure milk did not spoil as quickly in Finland and rural Russia.
This is amazing. This makes me so hopeful because it reminds me a lot of the story that was told actually at the very beginning of this season about the angel's glow. Luis, I don't know if you remember this, but there was the bacteria during the Civil War, actually, that got into soldiers' wounds and was glowing and was like kind of a natural antibiotic. And spoiler alert, that story ended up not being the true story. But this makes me hopeful that there could be something like that out there. It's like the naturally occurring antibiotic properties of the slime in frogs. It's really interesting because it makes sense also, that frogs would need to be protected from all these things. I'm just, man, I think I'm just psyched to unlock the powers of the slime.
And I think this also gives us a reminder, just kind of how you closed the previous story, that this is an opportunity, or just actually finding the practical purposes and the practical reasons behind naturally occurring phenomenon. There's so much potential in studying traditional practices. And I think oftentimes we overlook indigenous communities that put placentas in trees or throw frogs in milk and discard them as goofy, magical thinking, when maybe we could be tapping into some previously unknown benefits of the natural world.
Yeah.
And we can show that in a frog.
Yeah, we kind of end in the same place because we're also at a spot where it's like people back in time had something figured out that they didn't completely understand. And even at this very moment in time, we don't really fully understand what it is that they were kind of tapping into. So I feel very validated now because now no matter which story is true, I was right. Because it's the same point either way. This is already a victory for me, frankly.
And, well, it's a victory for frogs everywhere because now we have an incentive to save the frogs, Kurt. Save the frogs 2025.
So we can throw them in the milk.
Yep. We need to breed
Save
frogs.
the frogs so we can enslave the frogs. That's the motto of this podcast.
God, die bathing in milk? One can only dream. Well, Kurt, these are the two stories for today. Let me give you a quick reminder of what you just heard. The story you just heard, of course, is how milk and frogs have a long history between them. One that was often overlooked, but it all comes down to the goo that saved the milk. And of course, the first story was of Dewey Doldrum Miller, who found out a secret recipe to spice up his tobacco fields. And what was it? Oh, what could it be? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's placenta. Oh yeah. What do you think, Kurt?
Wow. I'll say this. When you said at the beginning that you were going to talk about superstitions, I don't know what I was picturing, but it certainly was not burying placenta and putting frogs in milk. So you've really got me thinking here, Luis. That being said, I think I'm ready to move on to our least favorite part of this podcast.
Damn, Kurt, that was quick. No thoughts. Head empty, ready to move on. I'm into it.
I've got to know whether there's the magical powers of placenta or the magical powers of slime, okay? Frankly, I can't go another moment of my life without finding out which one of these things I need to be tapping into.
Let's do it then, Kurt. Let's move on to our least favorite part of this podcast, which of course is deliberation. Let's hear it, Kurt. What are your thoughts?
Wow, okay. So, again, to talk about this first story, it's kind of like I said before about what interests me about, stem cells and this knowledge that we don't really have yet. And, Luis, I don't know if you know this, but one of the things about me that's probably unique is that because of where I'm from, I actually had like a class in high school where we learned about how to grow crops and like how to farm animals and what nutrients you put in the ground for crops. And
did you have the placenta quarter?
There was no placenta quarter, but, I can imagine that the minerals or the nutrients that would be in a placenta probably would be really good for crops as well, because it's all just kind of like, material for organic life. That being said, I also, just because of that, but also because of just learning history, know a lot about like Monsanto and kind of the various things they've gone through to monopolize the farming market. But, if you don't know about Monsanto, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, just go look up some stuff about that. But all that to say that, like, ultimately, I think whatever is the most effective method, someone will find a way to do and monetize, no matter how unsavory it is. But, there is like a real world limit of how many placentas you could get your hands on. So on that story, I kind of feel on the true false side, torn between those two things of like, if this really worked, I feel like we'd be doing it everywhere, right? But also at the same time, like, it makes sense to me. So I'm kind of grappling with that. But I don't want to brush over too much that I am just kind of intrigued also about like the superstitions that you talked about dealing with placentas. And first of all, it's always funny to do the like, if you bury it on the left side, it's this. If you bury it on the right side, it's that. Because that's just such a human thing to be picking arbitrary things. And it's like we're making life decisions based on that. But also, as I said before, I'm always interested in the knowledge that ancient people had that they didn't really know what they knew. And, that's kind of the same thing like we were talking about with the second story. We got the frogs in the milk and the frog slime. And, you were saying that this is like kind of specific frog slime, and then like these other frogs have got other things. Who knows what we could find out? They could find frog slime out there that cures cancer, okay? I mean, the possibilities could be endless with frog slime. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm very excited about the possibilities here.
The cure is out there, but it's in echidna dung.
And, this story, I think the only thing that like gives me pause about it is that, man, I'm just having so much fun conceptually with, we got frogs and milk, frog slime, slime and milk, all this stuff. It makes me nervous that this is something that I know if you thought of this, you would be like laughing to yourself, and you would know that this would make me laugh too. Like, this is a good story to distract me with. And of course, because we're talking again about like this naturally occurring antibiotic, it's always possible that you had thought about, I talked about this story before with the angel's glow, so this is maybe something that I'm primed for. So, I can't say for sure where I stand on that. But what I am really happy about is that either way, we're going to get to, we're tapping into the power of slime, or we're tapping into the power of placenta. This is just a personal decision. I'm leaning a little towards slime. I think I'd rather be dealing with slime, but either way, I'll take it, baby. Okay. I'm ready to get these new age remedies.
You're taking placenta over slime, or are you taking slime over placenta? What's winning over?
Well, I think like my heart wants slime a little more. I'd rather like, I guess I'm more comfortable having a slime plug than a placenta plug. But also I would say that my true sense meter is going with slime. I think I'm believing more in the power of the frog slime in the milk than the placenta in the tobacco plant.
Believe in slime.
Believe in slime.
Well, Kurt, you chose to believe in slime, and boy, was that choice fortuitous. It is the correct story, Kurt.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's wrap this bad boy up. I gotta get this slime plug lined up.
Well, okay. Yes, no, it is the correct story.
No,
Kurt.
I'm kidding. Please tell me.
Good job. Well, I mean, I told you everything there is to know about the slime frog. That's it. That's the whole thing. They used to throw frogs in milk, and slime is good for you apparently. So, hey, that goes out to you, world. Way to go. Although, something that does give me pause and something that does make me a little sad is the fact that we've had this information for 12 years now, 13 years now, and what have we done with it? Nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's ridiculous. Maybe we're too afraid of going after these Russian brown frogs, but I think we're even more afraid of curing salmonella and staphylococcus. I don't know, man. I think in this capitalist world, it's beneficial to keep people sick. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Starting getting on my stump, on my socialist stump. This capitalist system wants to keep you down with salmonella. They don't want you to know about the frogs.
Luis, I said wrap the podcast up, not stop the podcast.
Maybe it's because Russia has been falling on the wrong side of history lately, that the U.S. or the rest of the Western world doesn't want to see or hear about Russian brown frogs. But we are here to tell the truth, and we are here to tell people Bring the frogs back.
The government is turning the frogs gay because they know their slime cures cancer. And you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. These frogs will not turn you gay, unfortunately, but they will cure your milk. So, hey, one thing for another.
You know, I do want to say lastly, seriously, about this whole frog slime thing. Like, I think that one of the reasons why sometimes things like these take a long time to kind of discover is just like because of the ick factor, which, like, I get it. Nobody wants to think about like frog slime in their milk. But at the same time,
Maybe you don't.
That's true. Speak for myself, right? But at the same time, you never know what the knowledge of understanding this could open up for us. I mean, like, this is the stuff that's kind of exciting because I feel like the discoveries that lead us to the future, they kind of happen like really fast in a moment all at once. You know, maybe there ultimately is no real super beneficial quality of frog slime, but maybe it's like the rocket fuel that we need for intergalactic travel, okay? We'll never know until we start finding out why these frogs kept the milk good, all right? So, in conclusion, the frog slime studies need funding. If you learn nothing else from that podcast, please. Fun slime. Believe in slime.
Yeah, believe in slime. Goes out to you guys.
This goes out to all our frog listeners. Keep producing that slime, baby. We're going to Mars.
Well, and I think with that, let's move on to placenta, Kurt. Placenta, for the most part, is a fake story. There are indigenous groups that bury placenta and do things with placenta, and indigenous tribes and naturally based tribes that do place a lot of importance in placenta. So, coconut shells with placenta inside of them hanging on trees, that is a real thing in Indonesia.
Wow.
So way to go there.
And it's just like to kind of preserve the spirit or like the good vibes of a person. It's not like this is gonna promote luck or something. Like every placenta gets put up.
Yeah, and I mean,
Wow.
It's a tradition, and according to the article I read, it's a tradition that allegedly it's been going on as long as the town has existed, as long as this community has existed. So I think it's just
That's a lot of placenta.
maybe we've forgotten why we hang up these placentas, but we're just doing it for the vibes now. I don't know. I really don't know. But beyond that, everything else is false. I will tell you how all of this came to be, Kurt. I was browsing Reddit, as one does when they're unemployed. And
On r/placenta.
no, funny enough, I was on r/West Virginia. And I don't know, and don't ask why I was in r/West Virginia, but someone was talking about, hey, what are superstitions that you grew up with, especially in the Appalachians? Well, someone said about burying a placenta and bringing good fortune. I'm like, okay, this would be sick. And considering I already had the story about the frogs and having scientific backing, I'm like, okay, let's make something up. So I spent a lot of time looking at the map of West Virginia, looking at places that would be most fertile for tobacco and wheat. And, well, I just decided to pop down Doldrum Miller and his placenta plants. That just all came naturally. But everything I said after indigenous communities, Kurt, fully made up. Every single detail.
Wow, that's impressive because that was such a richly woven tapestry, a winding tale of events. Because we did the French-Indian War, and then we did the town was named Wiley, Virginia. I mean, you got to be kidding me. And Dewey Doldrum Miller, that's the guy. That's the guy who was there farming tobacco and wheat. No doubt about it. Really, the only thing that I was kind of thinking about was I was like, these massive tobacco plants in placenta. I don't know, but the rest of it all fit together perfectly, and it had this nice kind of snaking thing of what a lot of true historical stories have, where they kind of like keep intertwining with real major events like the French and Indian War, but not really in like a way where like that's what it's all about. They just kind of bump into them, and then they're going over in this direction. Oops, I got a placenta plug, and I'm growing tobacco plants, and now I'm a government official. So I don't want to disregard all that this story just had so much going on. I really got distracted with the power of placenta, but I mean, who wouldn't? There's many delights in the tobacco and wheat placenta garden.
There's the garden of earthly pleasures is vast and it's full of placenta.
The forbidden fruit is a 6-foot tall tobacco plant, and it's tangy, boy.
Oh, man. And well, to give you all a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, we were talking just before this episode and we began recording about how I've been reading a lot of magical realism stories lately. Particularly, I've been on 100 Years of Solitude. And I think the influence of reading that book while researching about placenta, I think really influenced the story because they buried placenta in the gardens. And now you have 6-foot tall tobacco plants. What's going on here?
That's true. It's very magical realism. Wow. I can't believe I didn't catch that, you know. I should have seen it coming. But either way, I did ultimately get it. So the Civil War continues, Luis. That's 7 for me and 9 for you. Closing the gap, but I think I'm not going to dare have any hope yet.
Well, yeah, I think you do. I think you can feel safe, but never let your guard down, you know?
I mean, I'm just head empty. I'm just staying head empty, enjoying the medicinal powers of slime. So, you know, we're all good either way. I'm not getting too stressed about it right now.
Okay, good. That's the attitude you should have, Kurt. And well, with that, we come to an end of the episode. The Civil War is still raging between Kurt and I. That only means that we have to bring more smoke, more mirrors in every subsequent appearance of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Did you get this right? Please let us know. You can find us really anywhere you get your podcast. You know this, sweet, sweet, beautiful children. But also, you can find us on our social media. On Instagram at UnbelievablePod. We are also on Twitter at UnbelievablePC. And as we said at the beginning of the episode, we are on TikTok also at UnbelievablePod. There's some really funny ha-has on there as well. Other than that, beyond that, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with more stories, hopefully involving less placenta, but so much more slime. That's the dream.
Bye, y'all. And remember, believe in slime.
Believe in slime. See ya.